This is the inaugural Global READ-A-THON for the Center for Studies on Africa and its Diaspora, coming to you from Georgia State University in Atlanta. Here is former CNN anchor and White House correspondent, Suzanne Malveaux.
Welcome back to the inaugural CSAD READ-A-THON at Georgia State University. I'm your host, Suzanne Malveaux, joining you live from Atlanta. Well, I hope you've been enjoying the program. It is really amazing. We still have so much more coming your way, including a reading from Tayari Jones. She is the author of the critically acclaimed book, An American Marriage. She's going to join me here live in the studio in the coming hours. This is an interview. You're not going to want to miss this one. But for now, I want you to enjoy this collection of works from Georgia State students. I'm so excited to be here on the campus of Georgia State University in the city that I love, Atlanta. I've met so many amazing students. We've been talking about their favorite books, literature, and history, so let's go. It's a pleasure to meet you, Professor Jonathan Gales. You are chair of the African American department here at Georgia State University, as well as the chair of the board of CSAD. This is an exciting time. I mean, it was 30 years ago that you had students who were protesting, marching for African American studies, but at the same time, it's a challenge. I mean, this is being challenged throughout the country, and some people are saying that it doesn't belong. How do we preserve what we've established, what we've fought for these decades?
Absolutely. I think part of what we have to do is have a concrete understanding of history and the manner in which history is connected to the present day. And this is one of the reasons why programs like this, READ-A-THON, are very, very important. When we think about Africana Studies here at Georgia State University, one of the things that we do is we demonstrate the degree to which we are connected to this history, but not just to history, what has happened, but also what is happening in the present day. And also providing our students with a critical lens to understand what is happening in the present day and also what may very well happen in the future. So we think about some of these efforts, as you indicated, to ban books in 2023. It's very interesting to think about the notion of denying people access to knowledge. So in my mind, that is one of the reasons why departments like Africana Studies, like efforts like READ-A-THON, like institutes like CSAD, centers like CSAD are critically important because it is about literacy, ultimately, literacy in the broadest sense, so that our understanding of the world around us is informed and has a perspective that reflects a broader engagement of human reality and humanity ultimately.
So you focused on so many different aspects of the scholarship, the black superheroes in the comic books, the history of Ebonics, the black masculinity in the literature. How do you meet students where they are? Because you're dealing with books, topics, different medium, and you know, these students are on their phones, TikTok, the whole thing, and we're talking about books, reading books, learning.
Well, let me say this. My students are not on their phones in my class.
Okay.
No, they are. I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to ask students about their interests. So generally speaking, in my lower level classes, I ask students, what are the questions that you want answered this semester? I have an idea of the material that I want to assign. But students change so quickly these days, from year to year, with all the access that they have to information. You have to be grounded, at least to some degree, in what it is that they want to know.
What do they want to know?
Well, it depends on the semester. Right?
Well, give me an example.
Right. So I think there's more interest now in the continuing reality of racism in this country. So if we think about the summer of 2020, students at that time witnessed publicly the kind of racial violence that they'd only read about. And so they have all of these videos being circulated, and they see it again and again and again, and they want to understand, why are we still having these experiences, right?
There was something that was very significant that the university did in recognizing 3 black women students who tried to desegregate the university, and ultimately the NAACP, it was one of their first cases, they were successful in getting the federal government to do so, but they were not able to attend ultimately, but they did get honorary degrees after six decades later. Tell me a little bit about that, the significance.
I mean, if we think about the kind of courage that it took at that time to file such a suit, and what was it that they wanted? They wanted an education from Georgia State University, and they were denied that education. And I think it's a powerful thing that Georgia State was able to do, that our president, Brian Blake, was able to do, in awarding these degrees, too posthumously, unfortunately. But it certainly coincides with the fact that we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Department of Africana Studies here at Georgia State. And so to me, it speaks to the broader mission of Georgia State University as our leaders have articulated it, which reflects this commitment to inclusion and diversity. And I'm glad that we didn't miss an opportunity, at least to recognize them. It's late, far too late, but better late than never.
Give me your book. What's your favorite book here?
Oh my goodness, New Black Man by my good friend and colleague, Mark Anthony Neal, who's at Duke. I have always been interested in masculinity, black masculinity in particular, and I think we tend to forget that men too are gendered, right? When we think about gender, we tend to think of women, but men are gendered. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to perform masculinity? The idea of masculinity as a performance. And then to be more specific, what does it mean to be a black man specifically?
What did he say? What was the message in this book that really resonated with you?
He provided me with a vocabulary to think about the ways in which we're socialized to think about masculinity, and whether or not those ideas serve us, serve our families, serve our communities. And in many instances, those ideas, our socialization absolutely does the opposite. It causes harm, it causes trauma. And I didn't have the vocabulary prior to reading this book. Now, others have addressed this topic, Bell Hooks, Patricia Hill Collins.
Sure.
But part of the power of this book is that it's also autobiographical. And his journey ended up intersecting with my journey as well.
In a very personal way. Can you share?
Right, so I'm an adoptive parent. I have two beautiful, wonderful, funny brown daughters. Right?
I have one as well.
right. And Mark's adoptive journey was very much similar to mine. Can I read something from the book?
Please.
Really quickly. Right. He says, because adoption caused me to reassess my ideas of what black manhood meant, as if our only value in the world was to get women pregnant, make money, and provide patriarchal leadership in our families and communities, I was also forced to reconsider what roles fathers play in the parenting process. Sociologist Sandra Walker acknowledges when children see their fathers wash dishes, clothes, and become involved in school activities, it presents a broader and more positive picture of what a black man can be. And there's a lot of that kind of autobiographical positioning. And I had no idea that I would adopt two daughters when I read this book. And later, having access to these ideas, and then of course expanding my reading, it has absolutely informed how I parent. And it creates some very interesting moments with my daughters because I do things that fathers traditionally don't do.
Yeah.
But I take pride
in that.
The dishes most of the time. Yeah. But I take pride in that. And I have reading to thank for that. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, so much for sharing your personal story as well as your scholarship.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Happy Black History Month. My name is Tanya Washington Hicks. I'm a professor of law at Georgia State University College of Law in Atlanta, Georgia. I am sitting in my office in downtown Atlanta, and I'm reading this passage from one of my favorite books by my favorite author, Toni Morrison. The passage is from Tar Baby. In those 8 homeless years, he had joined that great underclass of undocumented men. And although there were more of his kind in the world than students or soldiers, unlike students or soldiers, they could not be counted. They were an international legion of day laborers and muscle men, gamblers, sidewalk merchants, migrants, unlicensed crewmen on ships with volatile cargo, part-time mercenaries, full-time gigolos, or curbside musicians. What distinguished them from other men, aside from their terror of Social Security cards, was their refusal to equate work with life and an inability to stay anywhere for long. Some were Huck Finns, some Nigger Jims, others were Calibans, Staggerleys, John Henrys. Anarchic, wandering, they read about their hometowns in the pages of out-of-town newspapers. Since 1971, Sun had been seeing the United States through the international edition of Time by way of shortwave radio and the views of other crewmen. It seemed sticky, loud, red, and sticky. Its fields spongy, its pavements slick with the blood of all the best people. As soon as a man or woman did something generous or said something bold, pictures of their funeral lines appeared in the foreign press. It repelled him and made him suspicious of all knowledge he could not witness or feel in his bones. When he thought of America, he thought of the tongue that the Mexican drew in Uncle Sam's mouth, a map of the U.S., as an ill-shaped tongue ringed by teeth and crammed with the corpses of children. The Mexican had presented it to him with a smile the day Sun bashed the snapper's head in. "Americano," said the Mexican, and handed him the picture he'd drawn in prison and kept in his locker. They were close to Argentina and had been fishing off the prow that morning, pulling in snappers so rapidly they seemed to be leaping onto the deck. All but Sun. The Swede and the Mexican, the two he was closest to, laughed at his spectacular bad luck. Suddenly a bite, and he reeled in a huge glitter of froth and steel. The friends watched admiringly as the fish flopped into death. But when Sun bent down to remove the hook, the fish executed a dazzling final arc, 3 feet above the deck, and slapped his face. The Mexican and the Swede laughed like children, and Sun, holding the tail down with his knee, bashed with his fist the snapper's head. The mouth pulped, and a little eye skittered across the deck. The Swede roared, but the Mexican was suddenly quiet, and later handed him the drawing, saying, "Americano, cierto americano, es verdad." And maybe it was so. In any case, if he was punching dying fish in anger, if he was pricked to fury by the outrageous claim of a snapper on its own life, stunned by its refusal to cooperate with his hook, to want, goddammit, to surrender itself for his pleasure, then perhaps he was cierto americano, and it was time to go home. Not to the sticky red place, but to his home in it, that separate place that was presided over by wide Black women in snowy dresses and was ever dry, green, and quiet. Happy Black History Month.
Hello, my name is Remy Desagugwa, and I'm sitting inside of the Gay Johnson McDougall Center for Global Diversity and Inclusion. In 1965, Gay Johnson became the first Black student admitted to Agnes Scott College. When the announcement that the college would integrate appeared in the 1962 Spring Alumni Quarterly, some against the decision argued that integrating was not necessary for upholding Christian ideals. Today, I'll be reading 2 passages from Dr. Martin Luther King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail. I've heard numerous religious leaders of the South call upon their worshipers to comply with the desegregation decision because it is the law. But I have longed to hear white ministers say, follow this decree because integration is morally right, and the Negro is your brother. In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churches stand on the sidelines and merely mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard so many ministers say, those are social issues which the gospel has nothing to do with. And I have watched so many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion, which made a strange distinction between bodies and souls, the sacred and the secular. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The urge for freedom will eventually come. This is what has happened to the American Negro. Something within has reminded him of his birthright of freedom. Something without has reminded him that he can gain it. Consciously and unconsciously, he has been swept in by what the Germans called the zeitgeist. And with his black brothers of Africa and his brown and yellow brothers of Asia, South America, and the Caribbean, he is moving with a sense of cosmic urgency towards the promised land of racial justice. Recognizing this vital urge that has engulfed the Negro community, one should readily understand public demonstrations. The Negro has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations. He has to get them out. So let him march sometime. Let him have his prayer pilgrimages to the city hall. Understand why he must have sit-ins and freedom rides. If his repressed emotions do not come out in these nonviolent ways, they'll come out in ominous expressions of violence. This is not a threat, it's the fact of history. So I have not said to my people, get rid of your discontent, but I've tried to say that this normal and healthy discontent can be channeled through the creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. Thank you.
I am Dr. Nicole Smith, Senior Lecturer at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. And my research areas include Black speculative fiction, Afrofuturism, and womanism. Spelman College is one of several institutions in the Atlanta University Center, one of the oldest and largest consortiums of historically Black colleges and universities. The Atlanta University Center is located near the historic West End, a neighborhood closely tied to Atlanta's history, including the Civil Rights Movement. I will be reading an excerpt from Octavia Butler's 1993 novel, Parable of the Sower. We are all God's seed, but no more or less so than any other aspect of the universe. God's seed is all there is, all that changes. Earth seed is all that spreads earth life to new earths. The universe is God's seed. Only we are earth seed, and the destiny of earth seed is to take root among the stars. Earth seed, Books of the Living, Saturday, April 26, 2025. Sometimes naming a thing, giving it a name or discovering its name, helps one to begin to understand it. Knowing the name of a thing and knowing what that thing is for gives me even more of a handle on it. The particular God is changed belief system that seems right to me will be called Earthseed. I've tried to name it before. Failing that, I've tried to leave it unnamed. Neither effort has made me comfortable. Name plus purpose equals focus for me. Well, today I found the name. Found it while I was weeding the back garden and thinking about the way plants seed themselves, wind-borne, animal-borne, water-borne, far from their parent plants. They have no ability at all to travel great distances under their own power, and yet they do travel. Even they don't have to just sit in one place and wait to be wiped out. There are islands thousands of miles from anywhere, the Hawaiian Islands, for example, and Easter Island, where plants seeded themselves and grew long before any humans arrived. Earthseed. I am Earthseed. Anyone can be. Someday, I think there will be a lot of us, and I think we'll have to seed ourselves farther and farther from this dying place. I've never felt that I was making any of this up. Not the name Earthseed, not any of it. I mean, I've never felt that it was anything other than real, discovery rather than invention, exploration rather than creation. I wish I could believe it was all supernatural and that I'm getting messages from God, but then I don't believe in that kind of God. All I do is observe and take notes, trying to put things down in ways that are as powerful, as simple, and as direct as I feel them. I can never do that. I keep trying, but I can't. I'm not good enough as a writer, a poet, or whatever it is I need to be. I don't know what to do about that. It drives me frantic sometimes. I'm getting better, but so slowly. The thing is, even with my writing problems, every time I understand a little more, I wonder why it's taking me so long. Why there was ever a time when I didn't understand a thing so obvious and real and true. Here's the only puzzle in it all, the only paradox or bit of illogic or circular reasoning or whatever it should be called. Why is the universe? To shape God. Why is God? To shape the universe. I can't get rid of it. I tried to change it or dump it, but I can't. I cannot. It feels like the truest thing I've ever written. It's as mysterious and as obvious as any other explanation of God or the universe that I've ever read, except that to me, the others feel inadequate at best. All the rest of Earthseed is explanation. What God is, what God does, what we are, what we should do, what we can't help doing. Consider, whether you're a human being, an insect, a microbe, or a stone, this verse is true. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change.
Hi, my name is Sabrina Zayen, and I'm going to read from The Dewbreaker by Edwidge Danticat and the short story Nighthawkers. Stina Estem lived in a valley between two lime-green mountains and a giant waterfall, which sprayed a fine mist over the banana grove that surrounded her one-room house and the teal tin mausoleum that harbored the bones of many of her forebears. Her nephew recognized the house as soon as he saw it. It had not changed much, the sloped tin roof and the wooden frame intact. His aunt's banana grove seemed to have flourished. It was greener and denser than he remembered. Her garden was packed with orange and avocado trees, a miracle given the barren mountain range he just traveled through. When he entered his aunt's yard, he was greeted by a flock of hens and roosters that scattered quickly, seeking shelter on top of the family mausoleum. He rushed to the front porch, where an old faded skirt and blouse were drying on the wooden railing. The door was open, so he ran into the house, leaving behind the old man and a group of neighbors whom the old man had enticed into following them by announcing he had passed their houses, that he had with him and Estina Esme's only nephew. In the small room was his aunt's cot, covered with a pale blue sheet. Nearby was a calabash filled with water within the easy reach so she could drink from it at night without leaving her bed. Under the cot was her porcelain chamber pot and baskets filled with a few Sunday dresses, hats, and shoes. The old man peeked in to ask, "She's not here?" "No," he replied, "she's not." He was growing annoyed with the old man, even though he would never have found his aunt's house so quickly without his help. When he walked out of the house, he found himself facing a dozen or so more people gathered in his aunt's yard. He scanned the faces and recognized one or two, but couldn't recall their names. Many in the group were nudging one another, whispering while pointing at him. Others called out, "Danny, don't you know me anymore?" He walked over and kissed the women, shook hands with the men, and petted the children's heads. "Please, where's my aunt?" he asked for the entire crowd. "She'll soon be here," a woman replied. "We sent for her." Once he knew his aunt was on her way, he did his best to appear interested in catching up. Many in the crowd complained that once he got to New York, he forgot about them, never sending them the watch or necklace or radio he promised. Surprised that they'd taken his youthful pledges so seriously, he offered some feeble excuses. "It's not so easy to earn money in New York. I thought you'd moved to the capital. I didn't know your address." "Where would we have gone?" one of the men rebutted. "We were not so lucky as you." He was glad when he heard his aunt's voice calling his name. The crowd parted and she appeared, pudgy yet graceful in a drop-waist dress. Her face was round and full, her skin silken and very black, very few wrinkles, in his estimation more like beauty marks than signs of old age. Two people were guiding her by the elbows. As they were leading her to him, she pulled herself away and raised her hands in front of her, searching him in the breeze. He had almost forgotten that she was blind, had been since the day the fire that has taken away his parents' lives. The crowd moved back a few feet as he ran into her arms. She held him tightly, angling her head to kiss the side of his face. "Danny, is it you?" She patted his back and shoulders to make sure. "I brought him here for you," the old man said. "Oh, Zoe, why is it that you're always mixed up in everything?" she asked, joking. "True to my name," the old man replied. "I'm a bone that fits every stew." The crowd laughed. "Let's go into the house," his aunt told him. "It's hot out here." As they started for her front door, he took her hand and tried to guide her, but he found himself an obstacle in her path and let go. Once they were inside, she felt her way to her cot and sat down on the edge. "Sit with me, Da," she said. "We have made our old aunt a young woman again." "How are you?" He sat down next to her. Truly fine," she said. "Did Popo tell you different?" For years now, he'd been paying a boyhood friend in Port-au-Prince, Popo, to come and check on her once a month. He would send Popo money to buy her whatever she needed, and Popo would in turn call him in New York to brief him on how she was doing. "No," he said, "Popo didn't tell me anything." "Then why did you come?" she asked. "I'm not unhappy to see you, but you just dropped out of the sky. There must be a reason." She felt for his face and found it, and kissed it for what seems like the 100th time. "Were you sent back?" she asked. "We have a few boys here in the village who have been sent back. Many don't even speak Creole anymore. They come here because this is the only place they have any family. There's one boy not far from here. I'll take you to visit him. You can speak to him, one American to another." "You still go on your visits?" he asked. "When they came to fetch me, I was with a girl in labor," she said. "Still midwifing?" "Helping the midwife," she replied. "You know I know every corner of these mountains. If a new tree grows, learn where it is. Same with children. A baby still born the same way it was when I had sight." "I meant to come sooner," he said, watching her join and separate her fingers like tree branches brushing against each other. Both her hands had been burned during the fire that had followed the explosion at his parents' house, but over the years the burn marks had smoothed into her skin and were now barely visible. "I knew that once the time was right, you'd come back."
It began one fine day in Avondale Estates, Georgia. There were two dreamers reading Blues for an Alabama Sky, and they began to wonder all about Harlem Nights.
Hey, sweetie. Comment ça va? Mwah. Mwah. You just getting in?
Oh, just this minute. Where have you been?
Down at the hole in the wall, measuring these chubby little chorus girls who keep trying to lie about their weight when I'm sitting right there with the tape measure.
Why are you working at that dive? What's Bobby gonna say?
The money was too good to turn it down. I sound like a whore, don't I?
Not yet.
Well, thanks for the vote of confidence. How was your day?
Terrible, thanks.
No luck, huh?
There aren't any jobs in Harlem, period.
Well, you could always take Deal up on her offer to teach you typing.
That isn't funny. I've been all over Harlem and no one will even give me the time of day. There aren't any jobs doing anything, especially singing for your supper. You know, a whole family sitting on the sidewalk with the stuff set out beside them. Nowhere to sleep. Nowhere to wash. Just walking all day.
Listen, sweetie. I ran into Nick today.
You spoke to him?
He asked me where you were working and I had to confess that you were between engagements.
It's his fault, the sorry bastard.
Yeah, he said he felt bad about everything that had happened. And he gave me a number for you to call about an audition. Some club downtown.
Really? Where?
Yeah.
I know this guy. He's a friend of Nick's. You know Tony T.
Yeah, I've seen him around.
Why'd you say it like that?
Because I just don't think he's looking for a singer.
Nick wouldn't do that. He said an audition, right?
You can't make it be real just because you want it to be.
Are you really going to Paris?
That is not the same thing.
And why isn't it? Because you're some genius with a dream and I'm just a colored woman out of a job?
Is that your dream? Singing for gangsters? And then what?
And then I have to figure out something else. That's what you always tell me, isn't it? One step at a time.
Okay, one step at a time. Audition. Sing your heart out. And if he acts a fool, me and Sam will cut his heart out for him.
That's the deal.
Just don't ask me to make you anything to wear because I don't have time and I can't make time.
Oh.
You're on your own.
You can make 12 outfits for those hole-in-the-wall floozies and not one little dress for me.
They're not floozies and their boss is paying me enough to get me halfway to Paris.
How long can it take just to run up one little dress?
Wear your suit. It still looks good on you.
Everybody's already seen it.
You are not going to let me say no, are you?
Not if I can help it.
Okay. I will alter the suit slightly and I'll make you a hat. And that's my final offer.
I'll never ask you for anything again.
Well, let's have a drink before you make any more promises you can't possibly keep.
Do we have anything? I thought we drank the last of that.
Well, we didn't, but we're working on it.
You know, everywhere I went this week, there were 20 people in line ahead of me. I've never seen things so bad all over. Nobody's working and nobody's got prospects.
For prospects, you have to look past 125th Street. There is no law that says we gotta live and die in Harlem, USA, just because we happen to end up here when we finally blew out of Savannah. The world is a big place.
It's getting smaller every day.
No, it isn't. I can look right outside this window right here and see us walking arm in arm down the Champs-Élysées.
You remember when you used to take those old broke-up binoculars every time we went to the beach back home? Only Negro in the world who tried to see Paris from the coast of Georgia.
I am not. Langston used to... Oh, God, I almost forgot. He's back.
Langston, since when?
Since last Saturday. I ran into Bruce Nugent on the street and he said that the group is gathering for a welcome home party later. Everybody's gonna be there. Want to go preen?
Can I wear your tux?
No, I'm wearing my tux. You should go very film. You'll probably be the only lady at this affair. Show them what they're missing.
I hate being the only girl. You always abandon me the first time some sweet young thing flutters his eyes at you, and then I'm stuck the rest of the night making small talk with guys who are still pretending not to know why they came there.
Okay, Let's take Deal.
Deal is not ready for one of Bruce's parties, and you know that.
Well, it's time she got ready. Go ask her. We all deserve a night out.
I can take a charts back too, thank God.
And I am going to take a nap in the meantime, because Bruce's parties require one to be not only ravishing, but alert. If you don't hear me moving around by 7, wake me, okay? Dinner's at 8.
Dinner? How rich is Bruce's new lover?
It's just buffet, darling. His new lover may have long money, but he is not trying to feed the entire Negro demi-monde.
I'll wake you up in plenty of time.
Hey, my name is Demetrius Minnick Tucker, and I'm going to be reading from the collected speeches of Frederick Douglass, a speech that he gave entitled The American Apocalypse in June 16th of 1861. I'm reading in Piedmont Park because it's a great urban space. A lot of people in Atlanta love it, and so I thought it would be fitting. Men have their choice in this world. They can be angels or they may be demons. In the apocalyptic vision, John describes a war in heaven. You have only to strip that vision of its gorgeous oriental drapery, divest it of its shining and celestial ornaments, clothed it in the simple and familiar language of common sense, and you will have before you the eternal conflict between right and wrong, good and evil, liberty and slavery, truth and falsehood, the glorious light of love and the appalling darkness of human selfishness and sin. The human heart is a seat of constant war. Michael and his angels are still contending against their infernal host of bad passions, and excitement will last while the fight continues, and the fight will continue till one or the other is subdued. Just what takes place in individual human hearts often takes place between nations and between individuals of the same nation. Such is the struggle now going on in the United States. The slaveholders had rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. What a whirlwind, what a tempest of malignant passion greets us from that quarter. Behold how they storm with rage and yet grow pale with terror. Their demonstrations of offended pride are only equaled by their consummate impudence and desperate lying. Such lies answer themselves at the North, but do their work at the South. The strong enduring power which anti-slavery truth naturally exercises upon the minds of men, when earnestly presented, is explained, as I've already intimated, not by the cunning arts of rhetoric, for often the simple and most broken utterances of the uneducated fugitive slave will be far more touching and powerful than the finest flights of oratory. The explanation of the power of anti-slavery is to be found in the inner and spontaneous consciousness which every man feels of the comprehensive and stupendous criminality of slavery. There are many wrongs and abuses in the world that shock and wound the sensibilities of men. They are felt to be narrow in their scope and temporary in their duration, and require little effort for their removal. But not so can men regard slavery. It compels us to recognize it as an ever-active, ever-increasing, all-comprehensive crime against human nature. It is not an earthquake swallowing up a town or city and then leaving the solid earth undisturbed for centuries. It is not a Vesuvius which, belching forth its fire and lava at intervals, causes ruin in a limited territory, but slavery is felt to be a moral volcano, a burning lake, a hell on the earth, the smoke and stench of whose torments ascend upward forever. Every breeze that sweeps over it comes to us tainted with its foul miasma and weighed down with the sighs and groans of its victims. It's a compendium of all the wrongs which one man can inflict upon a helpless brother. It does not cut off a right hand, nor pluck out a right eye, but strikes down at a single blow the godlike form of man. It does not merely restrict the rights or lay heavy burdens upon its victims, grievous to be borne, but makes deliberate and constant war upon human nature itself, robs the slave of personality, cuts him off from the human family, and sinks him below even the brute. It leaves nothing standing to tell the world that here was a man and a brother. In the eye of the law of slavery, the slave is only property. He cannot be a father, a husband, a brother, or a citizen in any just sense of these words. To be a father, a husband, a brother, a citizen implies the personal possession of rights, powers, duties, and responsibilities, all of which are denied the slave. Slavery being the utter and entire destruction of all human relations. In opposing it, we're naturally enough bound to the consideration of a wide range of topics, involving questions of the greatest importance to all men. But for the universal character of the anti-slavery question, it would have been impossible to have held the public mind suspended on this discussion during the space of 30 years. The best informed men have candidly confessed that anti-slavery meetings have been the very best schools of the nation during the last quarter of a century. The nation has been taught here, as nowhere else, laws, morals, and Christianity, untrammeled by prescription, unrestrained by popular usage, unfettered by moldy creeds, despising all the scorn of vulgar prejudice. Our anti-slavery speakers and writers have dared to call in question every doctrine and device of man, which could strengthen the hands of tyrants and bind down the bodies and souls of men. The manhood of the slave has been the test of all our laws, customs, morals, civilization, governments, and our religions. With a single eye here, the whole anti-slavery body has been full of light. With the golden rule, they have measured American Christianity and found it hollow. Its votuaries doing precisely unto others that which they would shoot, stab, burn, and devour others for doing unto themselves. To all who press the Bible into the service of slavery, we have said, if you would not be the slave, you cannot be the master. The fact is, slavery is at the bottom of all mischief among us and will be until we shall put an end to it.
Hi, I'm Parker Blair, and today I'm going to be reading Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice of Freedom by More than 20 years have passed since I wrote my first feminist book, Ain't I a Woman? Black Women and Feminism. Like many precocious girls growing up in a male-dominated household, I understood the significance of gender inequality at an early age. Our daily life was full of patriarchal drama, the use of coercion, violent punishment, verbal harassment, to maintain male domination. As small children, we understood that our father was more important than our mother because he was a man. This knowledge is reinforced by the reality that any decision our mother made could be overruled by our dad's authority. Since we were raised during racial segregation, we lived in a small black neighborhood, went to all black schools, and attended an all black church. Black males held power and authority over black females in all these institutions. It was only when I entered college that I learned that black males had supposedly been emasculated, that the trauma of slavery was primarily that it had stripped black men of their right to male privilege and power, that it had prevented them from fully actualizing masculinity. Narratives of castrated black men, humble Stephen Fetches, who followed white men as though they were little puppets, was to mine the stuff of white fantasy, of racist imagination. In the real world of my growing up, I had seen black males in positions of patriarchal authority, exercising forms of male power, supporting institutionalized sexism. Given this experiential reality, when I attended a predominantly white university, I was shocked to read scholarly work on black life from various disciplines like psychology and sociology, written from a critical standpoint which assumed no gender distinction characterized black social relations. Engaged in my undergraduate years with emergent feminist movement, I took women's studies classes the moment they were offered. Yet I was again surprised by the overwhelming ignorance about Black experience. I was disturbed that the white female professors and students were ignorant of gender differences in Black life, that they talked about the status and experiences of women when they were only referring to white women. The surprise changed to anger. I found my efforts ignored when I attempted to share information and knowledge about how, despite racism, Black gender relations were constructed to maintain Black male authority, even if they did not mirror white paradigms, or about the way white female identity and status was different from that of Black women. In search of scholarly material to document the evidence of my lived experience, I was stunned by either the complete lack of any focus on gender difference in Black life, or the tacit assumption that because many Black females worked outside of the home, gender roles were inverted. Scholars usually talked about Black experience when they were really speaking solely about Black male experience. Significantly, I found that when women were talked about, the experiences of white women were universalized to stand for all female experience, and that when Black people were talked about, the experience of Black men was the point of reference. Frustrated, I began to interrogate the ways in which racist and sexist biases shaped and informed all scholarship dealing with Black experience with female experience. It was clear that these biases had created a circumstance where there was little or no information about the distinct experiences of Black women. It was this critical gap that motivated me to research and write Ain't I a Woman? It was published years later after publishers of feminist work accepted that race was both an appropriate and marketable subject within the field of feminist scholarship. This acceptance came only when white women began to show an interest in issues of race and gender. When contemporary feminist movement first began, feminist writings and scholarships by Black women was groundbreaking. The writings of Black women like Toni Cade Bambara, Michelle Wallace, Barbara Smith, and Angela Davis, to name a few, were all works that sought to articulate, define, speak to, and against the graying omissions in feminist work, the erasure of Black female presence. During these early years, white women were zealously encouraging the growth and development of feminist scholarship that specifically addressed the reality, the recovery of buried white women's history, documentary evidence that would demonstrate the myriad ways gender differences were socially constructed, the institutionalization of inequality, yet there was no concurrent collective zeal to create a body of feminist scholarship that would address the specific realities of Black women. Again and again, Black female activists, scholars, and writers found ourselves isolated within feminist movement and often the targets of misguided white women who were threatened by all attempts to deconstruct the category woman or to bring a discourse on race into feminist scholarship. In those days, I imagined that my work and that of other Black women would serve as a catalyst generating greater engagement by Black people and certainly Black females in the production of feminist scholarship. But that was not the case. For the most part, Black folks, along with many white women, were suspicious of Black women who were committed to feminist politics. Black discourse on feminism was often confined to endless debates about whether or not Black women would involve ourselves in white feminist movement. Were we Black or were we women first? The few Black women academics who were seeking to make critical interventions in the development of feminist theory was compelled to first prove to white feminists that we were on target when we called attention to racist biases that distorted feminist scholarship, that failed to consider the realities of women who were not white or from privileged classes. Through this category and strategy was necessary for us to gain a hearing, an audience. It meant that we were not concentrating our energies on creating a climate where we could focus intensely on creating a body of scholarship that would look at Black experience from a feminist standpoint. By focusing so much attention on racism within feminist movement or proving to Black audiences that a system of gender inequality permeated Black life, we did not always direct our energies towards inviting other Black folks to see feminist thinking at a standpoint that could illuminate and enhance our intellectual understanding of Black experience. It seemed that individual Black women active in feminist politics were often caught between a rock and a hard place. The vast majority of white feminists did not welcome our questioning of feminist paradigms that they were seeking to institutionalize. So too, many Black people simply saw our involvement with feminist politics as a gesture of betrayal and dismissed our work.
I am Elizabeth West, and I am reading from Natasha Trethewey's memoir, Memorial Drive, A Daughter's Memoir. I am reading this excerpt through a videography of the 15-mile stretch of Memorial Drive. This road runs from the State Capitol building in downtown Atlanta in Fulton County to the entrance of Stone Mountain Park in DeKalb County. The narrative memorial that Trethewey writes in memory and honor of her mother offers reflection on how this road and its history traverses the lives and experiences of Blacks who have lived along its corridors. Chapter 17, Proximity. One evening in the spring of 2005, my husband Brett and I are walking into town for dinner at a restaurant on the square in Decatur. Since 2001, we have lived in Decatur, just blocks from the DeKalb County Courthouse, and but for that proximity, I have managed to avoid much of my former life here. I have even begun to relax into the idea that I can continue to do so. Regulars in the restaurant, we grab a high table in the bar and chat a few minutes with the bartender. We've just gotten our drinks when a man I've never seen approaches us, asks, "Did I see y'all walking from the hotel?" Because we were coming from home, it doesn't occur to me that he means by the hotel or near the hotel that we passed by on our route from home to the restaurant. When I say no, he simply apologizes and leaves us. But within minutes, the bartender brings us another round of drinks and tells us that Bob sent them over, with his apologies for bothering us. Brett and I both find this odd, so I decide to go over to thank him and introduce myself. He is a kind-looking man with eyes that droop at the outer corners, as if there is perpetually a deep sadness in him, even when he is smiling. When I tell him my name, he introduces me to his wife and asks me what I do for a living. We are engaged in the usual pleasantries, and still I have no idea why he approached us. He tells me he is an assistant district attorney in Rockdale County. "Oh," I say, "perhaps you know someone I know, J. Tom Morgan. He used to be the ADA in DeKalb County." "How do you know J. Tom?" he asked. "Well, there was this case years ago." I let my words trail off and look away from him, out the window toward the courthouse on the square. He pauses for a long moment before speaking, as if something is just now dawning on him, or that he is readying himself to say something difficult. "Was your mother Gwen Grimmett and Joey your brother?" I am stunned by his questions, that he knows who my mother and brother are. I look first to his wife to see if she seems as perplexed as I am. When I look back at him, there are tears welling in his eyes, and then he drops his head and weeps. "He was the first police officer on the scene," his wife says then. "Not a day passes that he doesn't think about your mother." This is the year of the 20th anniversary of her death, the year I have lived more years without her than I did with her. It is the year, Bob tells me, that the courthouse will purge the records of her case, and so he offers to save everything to give to me. When I meet him a week later, downtown in a bar across from the courthouse, he hands me a big file in a shopping bag and a bottle of wine. "You're going to need it," he says. I think often of Ralph Ellison's revision of Heraclitus' axiom about the role of character in one's destiny to one about the role of place. Geography is fate. I had willingly come back to this place, put myself in the proximity of the events of my past. When I finally sit down to write the part of our story I've most needed to avoid, when I force myself at last to read the evidence, all of it, the transcripts, witness accounts, the autopsy and official reports, the ADA statement, indications of police indifference, I collapse on the floor, keening as though I had just learned of my mother's death. What comes out is uncontrollable. The long, unbroken, primal wailing I never allowed myself back then. So I live it again in real time. Only what I am reliving now is not my own feeling of sudden loss, but rather the terror of her last minutes. 3 decades is a long time to get to know the contours of loss, to become intimate with one's own bereavement. You get used to it. Most days it is a distant thing, always on the horizon, sailing toward me with its difficult cargo. What I did not expect was to find her last scream, the one several neighbors told the police they heard a moment before 2 gunshots. Her "no, no, no" ringing in my mouth.
I was born by the river in a little tent, and oh, just like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. I go to the movies and I go downtown. Somebody keep telling me, Joe, hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. Then I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Oh, there've been times that I thought I couldn't last for long, but now I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will.
This is the inaugural Global READ-A-THON for the Center for Studies on Africa and its Diaspora, coming to you from Georgia State University in Atlanta.